Cal. Morning, Chris. It is 9:30, so we should probably get started. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 14 today. We're going to be looking at the death of John the Baptizer. And we're going to be looking at two miracles that are found in all four Gospels. These are actually two of the only ones that are found in all four. But Matthew puts a different slant on one of them that's not found in any of the other three. So we're going to be looking at that today. Do we have prayer concerns, updates? We saw Jim Friday at the Starbucks in Safeway. So evidently his eyes are getting better. So that's good. Anything else? Tom? How's Tom? Is he going to be here today? All right. That's good. Welcome to you. Give me your name again. Cindy. All right. Well, we have Cindy with us, sister of Nancy. What else do we have? Who's that? Colleen Grindley has an infection. Okay. Say it again.
My mom is still dizzy.
Okay. So let's keep Miss Sony in our prayers. She's still having a time with the COVID, isn't she? Kind of recovering from that. It takes a while. It takes a while. Anything else? If we were a balance, it would be like this. We're gonna try and even it out a little bit. All right. Anything else before we go? All right. We're going to move into our text then. John chapter 14. Before we do, Mark and Matthew are the only ones, the only gospel accounts that give us any details about the death of John the Baptizer. And, you know, it's funny that all of our Christian art always centered on the good stories, you know, the resurrection and the healings of different people. You got the pictures supposedly of Jesus, and usually it's not a bloody, marred figure. The Bible, though, really gives us some very graphic, horrific accounts that are told to us very vividly. Can you think of some? Sodom and Gomorrah. That is a horrific story, is it not? Okay. Okay. Warfare. Anybody else? Okay. Sometimes. Jesus' crucifixion. I mean, you can't do anything with that story without seeing it for what it was. And actually, prior to the Passion of the Christ, most of the movies prior to that didn't really show how graphic the crucifixion scene was. Now, I'm not saying the Passion of the Christ has everything correct, but it certainly gave you a real picture what the crucifixion was like. How about the story of Job? Is that not a horrific story? You'd have to live it to really know what he went through. How about the rape of the concubine? Judges 19, where not only is she raped, but her owner cuts her into pieces and sends body parts to the 12 tribes. Is that not a horrible story? That's one that actually, I love the book of Judges. In fact, it's one of my favorite books of the Bible. But that story kind of made me sick to my stomach because it is very, very graphic. How about Ananias and Sapphira? Is that not a horrific story? Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus 10. And how about the death of Herod? Acts chapter 12, where he didn't give God the glory and he's eaten by worms. Those are graphic stories. How many have you seen pictures and images of those hanging in somebody's house? How about the rape of the concubine? You have one hanging in your house? Why not? That's biblical, right? So what I'm trying to convey is that sometimes we kind of we make it a more pleasant picture, these stories, than really what they are. And the Bible's very, very graphic sometimes, isn't it? Why do you think that is? Do you have any idea why you think the Bible is so graphic at times? Get our attention? I think that's a very good reason. That was life. It's a very honest book, is it not? I mean, it tells us honestly the events that happen. And isn't it interesting, because the Bible is thought to be a book that kind of just paints the highlights of people's lives and how they just automatically faithfully served God. Is that really the picture that you read in the Scriptures? I read all the prophets saying they fell away from God. Does that sound like a faithful people? See, the Bible is very, very honest in some of the accounts that it gives us. And this story of John the Baptizer is one of those types of stories. Let's take a look at it. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus. And he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him." For Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." And though he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people because they held him to be a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company and pleased Herod, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." And the king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his guest, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Herod the Tetrarch is Herod Antipas. And interestingly, he's never called King Herod. He's called Herod the Tetrarch here. He never really got the status of the people as king. He is the grandson of Herod the Great, and he was also the Herod that would be involved a little bit later in Jesus' trial when Pilate sends him to Herod. So what does Herod believe? What does Herod believe about Jesus? Why do you think he believes this? Why does he believe that this is John? First of all, it's because of the things that Jesus is doing, isn't it? So immediately we assume, we have nowhere in Scripture that actually indicates John the Baptizer could do miracles. Maybe he could, but we don't have any examples of that in the Scriptures, but Jesus certainly did. And it was on the basis of the things that Jesus was doing that Herod starts reasoning, this must be John the Baptizer returned from the dead, okay? So why would he think that? Guilty conscience could possibly very well be, because in a guilty state you can imagine all kinds of things. Maybe the fact that this Jesus had greater power than John would somehow lend reason, if he is John the Baptizer returned in the flesh, now he has a greater ability than he had before. He was already a prominent man because, he was afraid to put him to death because people thought him a prophet, right? That kind of gives you an idea also, because that was the same reasoning for why the Pharisees would not lay hands on Jesus. There was great respect to those who were deemed to be prophets by the people. There was great respect for that, even though the prophets were, by and large, greatly mistreated. Any other thoughts as to why Herod might have believed this? Same followers? Okay. Why was John imprisoned? Okay, and he's basing this on the law. You could not have your sister's wife, because she's a very close relative, right? I mean, that would be adulterous. Brother's wife, yeah. You hear what I mean and not what I say. Yeah. All right. So he goes back to the law. Why would he go back to the law with Herod? Herod's a Jew, guys, right? He is a Jew. He's of the Jews. I know he was an Idumean, okay, but he was still part of the Jewish heritage, okay? So this was still evidently a law that was given to Jewish people, and that's what John is indicating. It's not lawful for you to have her. So why didn't Herod put John to death? Kind of already answered that, but no, why didn't he put him to death? No, why didn't he immediately put him to death? He was afraid of the people's reaction, yes. So what occasion brought about the daughter of Herod to dance? By the way, Josephus actually gives us the name of the daughter. Her name was Salome, or Salome, however you pronounce it, but that was her name. But what occasion brought her to dance for Herod? This is one of the proof texts that the Jehovah's Witnesses use for the reason why they don't celebrate birthdays. Because the only places in Bible they say that celebrate birthdays end with tragedy like this, and we're done by unbelievers. Now, I dispute that with them. Nonetheless, this is the text that's used for that. When it says that she came and danced, there are commentators who disagree as to her age and what the extent of this dance was. I have heard some that say she was a little girl, and the cuteness of her dance was what caused him to be pleased, and his fellow companions that were with him. Others say she was at least an adult of age, and in this particular kind of dance, if she wasn't fully nude, she was at least most of it, so that it pleased the men. I don't know which side of the coin is actually the correct one, because the Bible doesn't say, but I am kind of leaning towards, I think she was doing a provocative dance that actually enticed and pleased the guys. That's my take on it. But it is this dance that Herod uses the pleasure of this dance that he offers her something. What does he offer her? Up to what? Half the kingdom, because he wasn't going to give her the whole thing, right? All right? So it pleased him enough that he was willing to give her anything that her heart sets on. Why does she go to her mom? Okay, well, confidant's a very good person to ask. That might be an indication of her age, too, that maybe, seek parental advice before I actually ask for something foolish. That's possible. Nonetheless, she goes to her mother, Herodias, and Herodias is the one that prompts her to ask for John's head on a platter, nonetheless. Wouldn't that have been a nice gift to give to somebody? Christmas is coming up. What's Herod's reaction when this is asked for? Do you think he's just sorry? Just feeling sorry for that he offered it? What do you think? Okay, sorry to go through with it. What did you say, Jeanette? Grieved. Yeah, that kind of puts an extra slant on, what he's feeling, doesn't it? Yeah, I don't think he wanted to put John to death. I think that was something that he just did not want to do, maybe for the sake of the people, maybe because he just liked having John there. I don't know, because sometimes I think Herod probably did listen to John on an occasion. So why didn't he just refuse? He's the king, right? Well, he wasn't called king, but okay, he was bound by oath. That's not the only reason, though. He made the oath in the presence of company, right? That was actually, I don't want to offer something in front of them and not have the gall to actually go through with it. A man of his word, at least to these guys. At least to these guys. And so what you have here is a very graphic death that's described to us here. And what are the two things that John's disciples do? Verse 17. Somebody whispered it. Okay, they give the body a burial. And the second thing, they go and tell Jesus. And Jesus actually feels a bit sorrow over this. And yet the ministry is still in front of him. So he goes on to continue to be the Messiah, the one that John had prophesied. Don't you wish that somebody who had the distinction as being the great prophet like John would have had a better ending? Don't you wish that just things like that would be better? But I think it gives us a reality that we have opponents, people. We have opponents to us. And sometimes, and there are other places, I think it's probably waiting to happen here. There are places that bearing the name of Christ comes with an element of risk for your very life. So it's kind of a sad thing, but nonetheless, this is the way it planned out. All right. First of two great miracles by Jesus that are told to us in all four gospel accounts. First one is the feeding of the 5,000. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him, and they said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away, and go into the villages, and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We only have 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." And then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up into heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over, and those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Okay, what does Jesus do upon receiving the word about John? Okay, he goes off by himself, the deserted place. And how long is he alone? Exactly. So we're not told exactly how much time he had by himself, but it's not very long, because as soon as word is that he's here, the crowds get ready to go and see him again. What emotion does Jesus feel when he sees the great crowd? Verse 14. Compassion. What is compassion? Empathy. That's a good word. Concern, care, feeling somebody else's hurt is really what compassion is. Feeling their hurt. How long was Jesus with them? Verse 15. All day, even into the evening. There's probably the early hours of evening as it's coming about. And what did the disciples suggest? Yeah. We can't just go to the local McDonald's and get hamburgers for everybody, right? Why couldn't they do that? Well, they didn't have McDonald's then, right? Why did they suggest this? Yeah, and they'd be hungry, and probably they had a ways to go to get home, right? They probably had a ways to go because they were traveling on foot most of these places. So what does Jesus say? Verse 16. You give them something to eat. I want you to picture the shock by the disciples. When Jesus says these words, I want you to picture this. I would picture myself looking out over this vast crowd, and we know the number, and think, is he serious? Is he crazy? We don't have the ability to do this. Wouldn't that be what you all would think? Seems unreliable. Seems something that seems silly. And it was on the basis of their stock. What did they have? Would that feed very many? Just think about this. We got Thanksgiving coming up next month. Some of y'all will have a lot of family over. You got large families? Anybody got large families that come? No? Nobody has a large family? Oh, okay. People are looking at me like I don't know if I have a large family or not. Okay. Would you serve a couple of fish and maybe some loaves of bread if you had 30 people coming to your house? Well, why not? What about 100 people? What about 5,000 people besides women and children? You see what I'm saying? This is what they're seeing. This is what they're faced with. But I want you to look at the steps. What does Jesus do? First thing he does. Verse 18. So he asks for the items. Bring these things to me. What's he do next? Verse 19. Nope. He invites the crowd to sit down. They sit down on the ground, and then what does he do? Say it again. No, something before that. Looks up to heaven, gives the blessing, and then what does he do? Breaks the loaves and distributes them to the crowd with the disciples' help, right? Okay. They all eat. It says, verse 20, they all ate. They were all satisfied. And then they took up the leftovers, and how much was left? How's that possible? Okay. Okay. With God, all things are possible. But how's that possible? It's not. How did it happen? I'm looking for a word here. This had to be a miracle, guys. It had to be something unusual that just doesn't rationally make sense. And by the way, I see a parallel here in the way Jesus is able to distribute food for the plenty. I see a parallel with the way God could feed thousands and thousands of people in a wilderness by bringing bread down from heaven. Think about that. You got the bread of life here. He called himself the bread of life, who was able to do an extraordinary thing with just a few loaves of bread and some fish, a couple fish. And maybe these were whales. I don't know. Whales aren't fish, I know, but they probably thought of them as fish back then. But I don't think they probably were whales. I'm not even sure that they were large fish. They probably were, what we would catch out in the sea, but not enough to feed all of these people. How many people were there, by the way? Estimate is probably more than 5,000 people. Probably over 1 million people, because if you double it in size with the wives. That's what they say, huh? 10,000. Okay, my math isn't always good, but okay, 10,000. But that's quite a feat, is it not? And only God, as Cal said, only God has the ability to make this possible. And the fact that Jesus could do that wouldn't be another indication. Who is Jesus? Who is this guy? He's God. He is the Messiah. He is the Christ. But Matthew doesn't stop there. Check it out, what happens next. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountains by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the only gospel account that gives us Peter's part. This is a miracle that's found in all four, but Peter's part is only found here in the book of Matthew. So what does Jesus do? 22 and 23. What's the first thing he does? Send the disciples out, so he's by himself. You have to wonder, the disciples will ever wonder, how's he going to get back with us? How's he going to know where we are? I don't know. But that's what he told them to do. Get into the boat and go. And what else does he do? He dismisses the crowds, and then he goes off to himself to pray. Okay? He makes it possible so that he can spend time just him and God. Okay? And that's a very good thing. You know, we've talked about this in our spiritual disciplines. We need to set aside a time doesn't have distractions, where it can just be us and God. That's what all of the prophets did. They spent time with God. I remember how he said when we studied the life of Moses, what was the biggest difference between the growth in Moses' spiritual life and the lack of it in the Israelites? What was the difference? Moses spent time with God. That's exactly right. Okay, so how long was Jesus there? Look at 23 and 24. I'm not, kind of look at what it says and kind of give me a time element here. And notice the first part of the next line. Okay, so it was long enough for evening now to be present, and the boat had been off a good distance, right? So we're talking at least some time, maybe a few hours, perhaps. At what time does Jesus come to the disciples? Fourth watch. This would be somewhere between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so this gives you a good time element. We go from evening, and by the time he gets to them, it's in the wee hours of the morning. Okay, that would be the fourth watch. And by the way, the watches were determined by the changing of the guard, the stations. That's how the time elements were. You know, we have the changing of the guard over in England, and they kind of do that by regular time. That's how they did their time back then. What did the disciples see? And what do they think? What would you think? Why would you think it's a ghost? Okay, no one can walk on water. Okay. It doesn't mean that we're not today. There are people that are. I mean, you can search online and look at ghost happenings and houses and different things. I mean, you still have some of that today. Any other reasons why you think that they thought it was a ghost, or why you would think so? A mirage, okay. Shadow, perhaps. Very good point. Yeah, everybody was seeing this. Maybe they didn't take into consideration there were stepping stones way out there on the water. Is that possible? Stepping stones usually don't go that far out. Okay? How does Jesus calm their fear? Yeah, he reveals himself. Take heart, it's me. The name of God. I've had times where you come into a pitch dark room, and we do have pets, and once in a while, all they hear is noise. They don't know who's out there. And so sometimes you come in, hey, it's me, and as soon as they hear my voice, they recognize, oh, this person belongs here. And I kind of see that as, Jesus, as soon as they hear his voice, that was meant to be a very calming, soothing effect. What does Peter ask? Say it again. Well, actually what he says is, if it is you, So is he doubting? Is he questioning? Proof? Yeah. I don't know that it's a doubt. I think it's just, let's just make sure. Let me walk out on the water too. How does he have the ability? How did he have the ability? Say it again. Okay. All right. Belief. And what did you say? Okay. Jesus gave him the ability. Would you have asked this? Would you have asked? Uh-huh. Okay. You should not be. I don't know. This was early, wee hours of the morning, so probably it was dark out. I don't know how much of the water he could see. Tell you a little bit about me. I've never been a very good swimmer. In fact, I was not able to learn how to swim for most of my life. And the reason is I couldn't put my face down in the water because I didn't know how to hold my breath without that water going up my nose. And after experiencing that a few times, I was like, no, I ain't going to do that no more. So anytime I would put my face in the water, I would always plug my nose because that was the only way I could do it. Well, it's hard to swim like this, okay? You can't swim that way. When we were living in Sterling, we had a Y that we had membership with. And the pool only went up to what, about 5 feet? About 5 feet? And then they had a separate area that actually had a diving area. And interestingly, Sterling, we're a small town, but they actually had a swimming team there on the high school, and their meets would be at the Y. Well, I had actually got a pair of nose plugs that could actually free my hand, and so I started practicing going under the water with that on. And I actually found that I could actually swim a little bit as long as I was free from worry that the water would go up my nose. So I got the idea. I've never ever jumped off a diving board before in my life. I'm going to try it. And of course, we only had like 4 people there, and 2 of them was Glenda and Josiah. But they're all over now watching me, and the lifeguard is too. I go up there, and I get out there on the diving board, and I look down, and I get vertigo. I mean, it's like, man, that's really deep. And it's like, you've ever felt vertigo, how that feels? And the only way that I could do that, I had to close my eyes because I couldn't look down and see how deep that water was and jump. I mean, it was very tempting to just, I'm not going to do this. But I did it. I didn't die. I'm here. That was like several years ago. I'm still here. But the point of it is, I would never have asked Jesus of this because of my death of fear of water. I would never have asked that. And I don't know how many of us would actually have the courage to say, let me come out on the water if that's really you. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, just so hang on with that. So what happens? Pete kind of already talked about this. What happens? He gets out there. What's he look at? To Jesus to start, and then what? How could he not look at those things? Would you not have? How could he not? Because that was a present reality. I'm going to shock you here. We're tangible people, guys. We do everything by sight, sound, touch, do we not? That's how we operate. So if you even stepped out and actually somehow the water held you up, would you not look down and look at the water and feel the wind? And what would you feel? For me, I'd probably faint. Now you think that's funny. I probably would, because I'd be scared to death. Isn't that what Peter felt? Isn't that what he felt? And what results afterwards? He gets saved. He pulls him up. He does. I don't know if it's a chastise. I don't know if it's a loud rebuke. It just simply says that Jesus said, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" But look at what happens. They get into the boat. The wind stops. And what's the next action? This is the very first time that it's told to us that the disciples worshiped Jesus. This is the first time. If Jesus is not who he claimed to be, this would be the most blasphemous thing a person could do, to bow down and worship another human being. By the way, what happens when they worship the angels that way? Don't do that, because worship is reserved to God alone. So if he's a blasphemer, if Jesus is, if he's not who he claimed to be, then he's actually sinning by accepting the worship that is only reserved for God. But only God has the ability to calm the wind and the waves. Only God has the ability to be able to feed 5,000 people with just a few things. When they worshiped him and Jesus accepts worship, and they recognize him, you are truly the Son of God or equal to God, it's like giving him identity. I just want to finish up with this. I wanted us to really think about Peter's part in this. Where were the other 11? In the boat. We often use this story to talk about, as long as you keep your focus on Jesus, you're okay, but as soon as you take your focus off of him, you'll sink. That's certainly one of the applications of this story, because our focus does need to be on Christ. But I want to focus just a minute. How come Peter was the only one that had enough faith to say, "Lord, if this is you, let me come out," and then actually get out of the boat and do it? You ever think about that? Probably, and I would be probably one of them. I'd want to see it, This isn't usual stuff. I just recently, in fact, I heard just the other day, I heard this story used as a very powerful lesson. A lot of us as Christians find ourselves in very comfortable situations. And we like that comfort. We like to be comfortable. Faith is demonstrated by what we do, not just what we believe. And until we're willing to get out of the boat and leave our comfort place, I don't know that we can seriously say we're truly following Jesus. And I'm saying that just simply because I don't know that God died and gave his life for us so that we could live comfortably. He gave his life for us so that we would be the church. And the church needs to be involved. And that doesn't mean that we get to stay comfortable sometimes. That means that we sometimes have to be willing to trust him, even if that means getting out of the boat, getting out of our safety zone, our safety areas. So I just want to leave you with that thought, because I think it's a very powerful lesson, and certainly the focus here is on Peter, but I think sometimes we forget that there were 11 other guys over there that were watching this thing and didn't have the faith to actually get up and do something about it. Not yet. They would get it. It would come, but not now. It's not now. All right, we're done. So let's have a word of prayer. We'll finish up with the last 3 verses on Wednesday night and move into chapter 15 on Wednesday night as well. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for our time together today. Father, I'm grateful for this study of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew. I'm grateful, Father, that Matthew, one of the followers of our Lord, took it upon himself to actually write down these accounts, the things he saw. And I'm grateful that it is the first book of the New Testament, because it helps us piece together who Jesus is and how he came to be prophetically the one that would be our Redeemer. So I'm so thankful for this book, and I'm so thankful for our time of looking at Jesus. And I'm praying, Father, we are to mimic our Master. We're to mimic you, but we recognize that we're, even in our best efforts, we fall short in being like Jesus. But we don't fall short in being imitators of Jesus like the disciples were. And so, Father, I'm thankful that you have taught us that you are the giver of life, and you can cause great things to happen with just very small things. And I'm grateful, Father, for the reminder that you are the Lord, but it takes our willingness to trust you. Sometimes that means leaving our comfort areas, because what happens is we get very comfortable in our place. And when we get to that point, that's usually where we're not really doing very much for the sake of the kingdom or for the sake of the name we wear. Forgive us for those times and help us strive towards being like Peter in this case and being willing to get out of our comfort areas to just go follow Jesus. And help us, Father, to keep our focus on him. Father, in all things that happens today, may you be glorified, honored, and praised. And Father, I pray that you will open our hearts to hearing the things you have to teach us, that you would be pleased with our worship this morning, and that we would be an encouragement to one another as you've asked and commanded us to do. We thank you, Father, for this opportunity to be together. And we know we do so in Jesus' precious name, in whose name we pray. Amen.